Welcome back to another episode of the Membership IQ. This is where you go to get smart about membership. I'm Sarah Sladek, your host, and I'm so excited to be joined today by April Ellison, who, oh my goodness, April, you and I met a long time ago. I was still a
Mhm.
young professional when I met you originally. So it's so exciting to be chatting with you now, all these years later. I'm grateful that we are still in contact and excited to have you on the show talking about where you are now. Because when we first met, you were working at American Dental Association, and now you are in a new venture, new journey, all the new things. So maybe for the purposes of our audience, could you just give us a little intro?
Sure. And thank you, Sarah. And I do like to think that we're both still young professionals. So
I do too, as I
maybe
put
we
on my bifocals here. Yeah,
maybe we can still consider ourselves that
yeah.
young professionals. But like you said, when we first met some years ago, I was with the American Dental Association. I actually spent a bulk of my career with the American Dental Association in the membership area. So lots of experience and conversation can be had about what I've learned about membership during my ADA years. I resigned from the organization we're in 2025, so that was the earlier part of last year, after about 28 years, I think, with the organization. So long history there. But I founded the Lights On Collective, which is a consulting and coaching firm. And I am focusing on helping others realize their full potential. Very excited about that mission. Uh, had a passion for a long time now with doing that, and I'm so happy that I'm able to lend that to organizations, communities, and individuals. So that is where I am now, and really excited to talk to you more about what I'm doing.
That's so great. So before we move on, I'm curious, what was the background? Why the Lights On Collective? Why that name?
Well, I think about light bulb moments. I think about spreading light. There's a lot of darkness in the world. I want to be a contributor to light. And I think most people want that as well. I think sometimes people aren't able to bring light because they're not in a good place themselves. So the vision is if we can help everyone realize their full potential, they're in a better position to bring light to the world. And wouldn't it be great if we could all gather together and light up the world to
Yeah.
eliminate some of the darkness that we see? So
Oh
that
my
is
God.
the premise.
I love that. And yes, you're absolutely right. It's a time of, you know, change, which can bring great opportunities, but also great challenge for organizations and for individuals. And we're just living through an era of real transition. So that is
Absolutely.
my first question for you. What is currently top of mind for either for you as a leader, or you can talk about it through the collective experience and or those that you are serving through the collective. But just curious, what is kind of the burning issue right now? What's the hot topic?
Well, I think there are a couple. I think I've been working with organizations. I'm also working with individuals. I'm working with communities, and capacity seems to be top of mind for people. How do I do the work that I need to do with the staff that I have? And then most of the folks that I'm working with from an organizational perspective are volunteer-run organizations. So how do I leverage staff and volunteers to really impact the mission? And finding that balance is more challenging now in terms of cuts. People may have less staff, so they're trying to figure out how do I strategically engage my volunteers. But on that side, the skill set may not be as robust as staff skill set in certain areas. So I see organizations and myself as well struggling with how to balance that dynamic.
Hmm. And do you think that's something that's new, or that is, why that particular topic? Why right now?
Well, I think it's newer because of the economy and some organizations having to make tough decisions about where to cut. Some organizations never recovered from COVID or are still trying to figure out where to go from COVID. A lot of staff cuts were happened during the COVID period. So now in a season of disruption and change and figuring out how to grow, you may have less staff to think about or to leverage to do that. So it's not a new problem, but it's a different nuance, and the reason, the why is a little bit different.
Yeah. I was just prior to this interview doing some focus groups with young nurses. And it is so interesting because you just mentioned pandemic. Like we think that we're out of the woods with that, but man, healthcare and nursing and it's still very real for them. They're still talking about what it was like during pandemic and how difficult it was on their profession and the people in their profession. So yeah, some of these things have a long tail on them.
Yeah,
And
and speaking of, it's so funny when you say long tail. One of the things that I was thinking about is we do say the pandemic is over, and some people are like, okay, it's over. But as a leader, we have to think about the cause and effect and the ecosystem of change. And some of those change or the impacts of COVID have long tails, like you said, and we're still trying to figure out how to manage change that came about because of COVID. So COVID may be over, uh, but is it really? I think is a
mm,
question that we should ask ourselves.
I think so too. It was such a monumental, totally shook things up, unprecedented. Everybody loves that word, but it's true. It was unlike anything else. And so you have been through change, you've been leading organizations through change for a long time. You've been in leadership roles, and I'm curious, you know, what's your secret? What insights do you have to pass on about how to lead in a time of change? Whether
Well,
it's this
I
one or another one, right?
yeah, I don't know if there's a secret, but there are certainly some learnings that I can share. And one is I want to go back to just that ecosystem of change, making sure that as leaders we have the mindset of cause and effect and thinking about if this change is over here, how does it impact what's going to happen over there? And sometimes we look at change in a silo, but I think we have to have a broader perspective on change. That's one. The second one is just a mindset in general. We can get, I could say, bogged down in negativity about change, but making sure you adopt a mindset of what's possible in the area of change, I think is very important, and balancing barriers against the opportunities. And one of the tools and the resources that I really like and I respect the conversation is anticipatory leadership, anticipatory mindset. And it's really thinking about the change, what's the opportunity, what's the trend, and how can we embrace the trend and think about how it can benefit us from a new value proposition from a membership organization perspective. So
Mm,
I think a little bit of mindset work is will serve leaders well when managing and leading change.
yeah. I like that idea, anticipatory leadership. And I do think that's a new skill that we're honing and we're seeing,
Absolutely.
emerge. Because for a long time, it was about just being sustainable and predictable and, like reliable. And now we're seeing that leaders have to be adaptable, flexible,
Exactly.
nimble, and
Exactly.
have that visionary, strategic, all the skill sets of leaders, the requirements, it's changing.
It's shifting. And particularly this anticipatory mindset is something that leaders can foster, but also volunteers within organizations, the volunteer leaders. Having your boards and other committees and councils understand how to be anticipatory, I think serves organizations really well. One book, I don't know if I can mention a book, but Daniel
Yeah.
Burris, The Anticipatory Organization.
Mhm.
I really enjoy his readings, and he breaks down the difference between a hard trend, something that we know is coming, versus a soft trend, something that's likely to come. And he gives good insight into how to leverage those to think about what is the opportunity for your organization. So as I've been working with organizations, I've been challenging them to go through those exercises so to better prepare for what's coming or what's current.
Yeah. That's so amazing. There is one association leader I know that really tries to push her people to think 10 to 15 years out. And then they back up and they say, okay, is our organization on the path to still be, are we aligned with where we think the market's going to be going 10 to 15 years from now? And it can be really hard to think that far out, but it is so important to, you might be making some guesses, and some of it will be well informed, but it's just the practice of saying, let's get out of our day to day and look at the horizon. I love that you mentioned that book. I'm going to have to check it out. I have not heard of that
Oh
book.
yeah, absolutely. Please do. I think you'll find it very enlightening.
Yeah. All right. So, talking about anticipatory trends, obviously, I love to talk about generations. And that's something we're always anticipating is generational change and new generations coming in the fold and all of that. And I'm just curious, what are you hearing in terms of generational trends? What are you observing? What's again kind of the hot topic or the pressing need right now?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I know we've been talking about the changing generations for a while and how it's impacting membership and the different needs and desires of the newer generations. But recently, I've been doing some work with high school students and elementary students, and I've had a chance to see it firsthand. And Sarah, I have to tell you that it is very fascinating uh, and but refreshing in some ways as well. Fascinating, refreshing, disturbing, all of those things kind of jumbled up together. One thing that I'm noticing is collaboration is not as prevalent as I've seen in some of the other generations. When we do workshops and exercises, uh, you almost have to force the collaboration. Everyone has a tendency to sort of do the work themselves. And if I put folks in groups and I say, have a conversation about X, Y, and Z, I hear a lot of silence. And so I walk around and I say, okay, guys, well, when you're in groups and you're collaborating, it means you have to talk to one another. So really pulling that out of some of the younger generations to have them have that type of conversation and collaboration, I see as a dynamic, and it makes me think about it from a workforce perspective. What does that mean when they show up in organizations and they have to work in teams and groups? So
Yeah.
that's really interesting. But I think there's some work that can be done at that level to help prepare them for the workforce. The other one is social and emotional learning. And you have the research, Sarah, and I don't know the research as well as you do, but I imagine that social media and being siloed in terms of how some of the younger generations are engaging has created some social and emotional disconnects. And there's opportunity to develop those skill sets, those soft skill sets for leaders as they move into the workforce. So I'm recognizing that those are some key opportunities.
Oh my goodness, yes. It is fascinating. And when you think about it, yes, social media has allowed for so many wonderful things, building community in new and different ways and expressing your opinions and voice, having a platform. But those aspects of communication and social development, brain development, definitely have another side to them as well. And so we do see more isolation. And I have to share this little story that because talking about putting young people into groups, I do generational workshops all the time. And it's so interesting now that seeing Gen Z come into the workforce because I'll break people up by generation, then I'll mix people up. And it's always interesting when they are first together as a generation. And looking at kind of how they come to conclusions and have conversations as generations. And then what
Hmm.
happens when you mix people up? And I mean, I've done this with hundreds, thousands of groups. And typically boomer groups, when they're with their peers, are very gregarious, they're loud, they're confident. Gen Xers, when they're told stand in a circle, they kind of make an awkward oval. They're like very independent. They're kind of
Hmm.
having side conversations, right? Millennials, they are always the group that stands the closest together, like almost shoulder to shoulder, which is also interesting. And then now with Gen Z coming in, um, I've noticed that the groups, when you tell them stand in a circle, they will stand in a line and then
Wow.
look at each other this way. It's side to side. And it's so fascinating. And I've kind of asked like, and explored and researched and asked questions after the fact. Why not stand in a circle? Or why is it
Hmm.
difficult having a conversation? And part of that ties back to I'm just not comfortable yet face to face.
Absolutely. I
I'm
can.
way more comfortable online, or I
Hmm.
need to get to know someone first before I'm comfortable initiating a conversation, or they don't know. It's like a foreign concept being
Wow. That standing
isn't
in a
that
circle
wild.
seems way too intimate. Isn't that that's something?
It
Yes.
is really wild. Um, so yeah, I think but again, when we see changes like this, I think it's important first to be aware of it,
Hmm.
notice it, accept it for what it is. Don't necessarily try to change it. But yes, to your point, it is an opportunity for your organization to think about is how we communicate and train and educate and inform and lead. Is that relevant to everybody? How do we adapt to make sure everyone feels
Absolutely.
a level of comfort? But wow, it's wild, isn't it?
It is very wild. It makes me think about meeting people where they are. A lot
Yeah,
of organizations, a lot of older generations are trying to fit the younger generations in this box that we've created, and
exactly.
they're not fitting. And so
No.
people are frustrated uh, uh, and have started a little bit of a negative connotation or negative narrative about the newer generations. I think it's unfair
Hmm.
because the flip side of it is because they haven't and they don't, you know, they're not bought into these boxes that we've created and other generations have created, and not bought in completely to tradition. It really frees up their thinking and their mind. And I've seen some amazing things happen in terms of their thought process and innovation and creativity. So I think there's an opportunity for us all to take advantage of that, because we talk about how complex the world is now. We're going to need that creativity and that innovation to move us to the next level. So I think we should
Yeah.
all kind of give the newer generations a break and think about how we can leverage their difference for the greater good.
Absolutely. There's that creativity piece, and there's also they are more willing to hold leaders accountable, which is actually a good trait in a really changing marketplace. Like, okay, do you not just talk the talk, do you also walk the walk?
Absolutely.
And that's important. Okay. So, my next question, which ties with this one, you are so good at building community. I've seen you do that throughout your career. And so, would you share some insights, experiences, ideas, tips with our audience about how to build a successful community of people?
Yeah, it is something that I've been involved with for a while. I enjoy it because I like to see people come together, and it's fascinating when it happens and you see the impact.
Hmm.
I'll start just from an organizational perspective. For a long time, I again worked in an organization where there were three levels: national, state, and local, from a chapter and a national grassroots perspective. And when you have an organization where a member has to belong to all three levels, it becomes really important to build that community, not only from an organizational perspective, but also from a member perspective. So I spend a lot of time in space building that community and bringing people together. One particular thing that I'm very proud of that I put together before I left the ADA are partnership principles. And it's really a common document when you're dealing with multiple stakeholders and trying to build community. How do we all want to work together to make sure that community is happening? Because it can be lost if you're not intentional about it. So I think having those types of agreements and having everyone bring their perspective to the table on what that looks like is a tip that I would give. Uh, the and from a community perspective, in terms of neighborhoods and different areas, I'm involved in a project now where we are building a new community, if you will, in an area where the dynamics and the demographics have changed tremendously. It was once almost 100% one racial and ethnic group. Now it has changed. So how do you build community with those changing demographics? And it's so funny because some of the learnings and the experience from membership organizations, Sarah, the tactics and the techniques are exactly the same. It's
Yeah.
engaging the residents. It's starting early. It's design thinking, not building it and thinking that they will come. So we are engaging stakeholders. We're bringing the residents in the community together to get their feedback. We're surveying early, building on those surveys, kind of not scaling too fast, doing some pilots. And the one thing that I will say when we talk about the high schoolers and elementary students from a community building perspective, sometimes they're forgotten and they're not asked to bring their perspective to the table. But we're being very intentional about going to the high schools and going to the elementary schools to ask them their perspective and bring their thoughts to the table because we think their voice will be important as we continue to shape the strategy.
Well, I love hearing that. I love hearing when young people are included. And yes, just, again, you said a really key word, intentional. And I mean, I just hear it so often that, here we are. Why is no one showing up? More or less. And or here we are, here's our executive team, and everyone else can just kind of follow along. And and in this era of change, that's just not a sustainable model anymore. You have to be really intentional about relationship building and being inclusive of different people, different backgrounds, different ages, different skill sets, and collaborating together. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Everything's so complex. I'm not sure why an individual leader or an individual organization would think that they can do it all on their own. It's almost impossible. You have to have
yeah.
that broader perspective, and people are willing to lend their voice, and we should all take advantage of it.
Oh, absolutely. So before we conclude our time together, which has been fantastic, but I'm curious to know, April, do you have, a success story to share or any additional advice to pass along to our audience?
Well, I'll share one quick success story because I'm really passionate about the next generation of leaders. And one of the programs that I have is the Next Steps Leadership Initiative, and it brings young adults together, typically folks who've been in underrepresented communities or systemic or experience systemic barriers to moving forward. Bringing this group together, and we talk about meeting people where they are. So not everyone has a formalized education in the groups that I bring together. The skills are varied, it's different. But what I've learned is if you have a willing mind and you give people the tools that they need to succeed, it's amazing what can happen. And I think about this one gentleman who went through the program, and you could just tell by the way he engaged that he had great potential and he just needed some help. And keep in mind that my mission is to help people realize their full potential. So very excited about this. Post program, He went on to start his own photography business, and it is thriving, not just surviving, but he's booked most of the time. And he's actually on my website, and he really talks about how the Next Steps initiative helped him gain some new skills and really motivated him to move forward in this space. So when I think about that type of impact that I can have on the next generation of leaders, I get really excited about that and look at that as a success story.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's fantastic. So, and I love that, the lights on, you're turning lights on for people and community building in a variety of ways, and including with really, really young people and it's still in, those elementary grades. So amazing. April, I'm so thankful for the work that you've done. And I'm thankful that you're on the XYZ University Advisory Board and that I get to work with you throughout the year.
Well,
It's
thank you for
an honor.
having me. I'm excited to be a part of your movement.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. So thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Membership IQ. We'll see you next time.